It was the assistant lighthouse keeper here at Pusica Point who began the Great Preservation Inlet Gold Rush, a man with the rather ornate name of Philip de Gruchy Payne. Now, there wouldn't have been a lot to do around here for an assistant lighthouse keeper on his days off, and perhaps not much more on his days on. In any case, Payne took to spending increasing amounts of his time prospecting for gold over on Coal Island. At the end of 1887, he was so taken up with his gold prospecting that he was fired from the lighthouse service for dereliction of duty. But by then he didn't care, he was raking it in from his gold claim. Word soon leaked out, of course, and before long, dozens more prospectors were flooding on to Coal Island. But what a place to dig for gold. The pay dirt level was anything from 2 to 10 metres below the surface, and to get at it, you had to first chop off the tree cover at the top, then excavate the tree roots, then shift square metres of dirt mixed with gravel and huge boulders before finally you could begin to wash for gold. It was a process that might take 3 months of preparation before ever getting near the gold layer. It certainly wasn't for the faint of heart, nor it seems for men with imaginations. The miners here named the creeks they worked across the island Number 1, Number 2, Number 3 and Number 4. Perhaps the most boring approach to naming imaginable. Further finds followed here near Moonlight Point on the eastern end of the island, where a giant 16-ounce nugget was picked up off the beach. And subsequently, a whole 6-acre area here was turned over by pick and shovel. Then gold was found in the precipitous country behind Pusica Point along the Wilson River, then at Steep 2 Island, and at Te Whara Beach near the old pass site of Matauira. These finds led to a full-scale gold rush around Preservation Inlet. Hundreds tried their luck amidst the constant rain and the perpetual plague of sandflies. But as with most gold rushes, all too soon, returns dropped away and the alluvial mining petered out. The diggers of the 1890s wrought incredible devastation on the bush and the streams all around the inlet in just a few short years, but today you'd hardly know they'd ever even been here. The bush is totally regenerated and the scars on the landscape have more or less healed over. You have to look pretty hard to find some rusty old tool that was abandoned in the bush and is just corroding away. More obvious though are the regular piles of tailings scattered through the bush and the pits where they dug down in that endless search for gold. There's just a little more to see of the next and last phase of mining activity that followed. Miners on the Wilson River discovered a broad band of quartz crossing the riverbed and veined with gold in 1891. Other similar quartz lodes were subsequently discovered on the other side of the inlet at Isthmus Sound. But gold like this wasn't for simple working men to recover, no matter how much sweat they expended. Quartz gold mining required heavy machinery, and heavy machinery required money. Lots of money. So it was that in the last years of the 19th century and the first decade of the 20th, mining companies were formed in Dunedin and Invercargill to fund the last big gold operations on the Preservation Inlet goldfield. Relics of these substantial industrial enterprises can still be found here in the bush, like this tramway line from the Morning Star mine at Te Oneroa here, or the stamper battery and Pelton wheels of the golden site at nearby Cromarty. And for a few short years, these very isolated mining sites produced lucrative returns for their investors. Not all of Preservation Inlet's mining efforts were successful. Here at Isthmus Sound was one spectacularly unsuccessful effort. This smelting plant was built for the Tarawera mine to recover gold, silver and copper from the ore, and it was based on a shaft that went back to 1897. Now, after all the effort of putting this smelting plant together, they attempted to smelt the first ore in about 1909, and they recovered nothing. The investors in faraway Invercargill and Dunedin must have got a bit of a shock at this and cold feet, because soon after they liquidated the company and then just abandoned the plant in the bush after just one attempt. In modern times, the site of the Tarawera mine in Isthmus Sound is a popular attraction for visitors to Preservation Inlet. The brick smelter chimney suffered serious damage following an earthquake in 2014. Fortunately, a sustained effort from the Department of Conservation and volunteers has repaired much of the damage.
All of this incredibly expensive and complex equipment was carted in here with enormous effort, only to be abandoned when it didn't work, like the smelting plant, or just when the gold ran out, as at the Golden site or here at the Morning Star.
Heritage sites like the Morning Star mine are monitored by Heritage New Zealand. Archaeologist Frank van der Heijden explains what this involves.
We just tend to leave it as much as possible and record what's there and monitor it together with Doc in this case. It's really well preserved. I think that's the most important part about this one. It was very well surveyed not that long ago, so we're just keeping a close eye on it. As usual, of course water, but here especially slips. There's a huge slip right behind there. And if that carries all those rocks down, that will severely damage the site.
These remote and often difficult to locate gold sites have fortunately been preserved and surveyed by the Department of Conservation, following a focused project in the early 2000s led by Rachel Edgerton and renowned archaeologist Peter Petchy. Today, the Department of Conservation is actively working to preserve Fiordland heritage by building on that earlier work.
Oh, actually, it's key. Yeah. Without those early surveys, and I mean, although they're back that time, they're actually, quite a while ago now, we wouldn't have that baseline, and that's what we need. The records give you a snapshot in time. So that's really important. So it can be as simple as going out taking photographs with a scale in it and describing what you see, anywhere to a full survey, so mapping the site and being really detailed about what components are there and giving recommendations. And you can all do that in the site record forms. You don't have to wait for money for a full-blown management plan and stuff like that. And so anyone who goes in there, such as the work you've been doing in there, is actually crucial to that because it's that baseline information. And so today with with your digital cameras and everything, even if you visit a place, even for half an hour, it's getting that record of what it's like now, and that means it will inform on management. So that's the key thing. And then there are some particular sites we need to maintain and keep them in that holding pattern, and then from there we'll get our conservation plans and that done. So key thing is updating records.
For a few short years, peaking in the late 1890s, these were successful operations, recovering significant amounts of gold and returning lucrative dividends to investors back in the cities. And for the working schmucks who did all the hard labour, there was a brief flowering of a real community here, and 2 townships that grew up in adjacent bays.
The first was Cromarty, originally planned as a village here in the 1860s, but finally came into existence on the back of the gold discoveries of the 1890s, followed soon after by Long Beach or Te Oneroa, one bay over. For a few short years, hundreds of men lived here and a tiny sprinkling of women and children. These townships also acted as commercial centres for isolated mines way out in the back blocks. There's a tramway that runs just behind this boiler up in the hills here, 8 kilometres through the bush, over the hills to a gorge on the Wilson River, and it just is a reminder of how precarious existence was for those hardy workers of the past. There were wharves, stores and post offices, bakeries and butcher shops, a hotel, boarding houses, sawmills and even a school. These were the most substantial settlements ever established in this most distant corner of New Zealand. And at their peak, about 1,000 people lived and worked here. But for all that today, there's virtually no sign of any of it.
Whilst only a couple of piles remain, the site of the wharf at the old mining town of Te Oneroa offers potential for maritime archaeologist Kurt Bennett. Matt Schmidt from the Department of Conservation explains why Kurt's work in Fiordland is important.
Because we're a maritime nation and we know very little about what's actually under the water because we haven't had any marine archaeologists. So you can have a little footprint on the land but a massive maritime site right under the water, and you might know a little bit about it, but quite often they're really extensive. So it's we don't discern between land and marine, it's all part of that cultural landscape there.
Knew that there was quite a settlement on land, and I took a couple of historic plans and overlaid them into Google Earth, and just to try and get a position, trying to understand the orientation of the wharf in line with the shoreline, and then working out how far it extended out, and then with that I just planned to survey as much as we could in the time frame that we had. So it was a non-disturbance survey, so we're just looking for what is on the seafloor visible to us, and then we're recording it with offset measurements so we can come back and build up a plan of the site. No, great conditions across the site. Good viz, probably sort of 5 to 8 metres across the site. Tricky thing is you're working with a reasonably silty bottom, so if you sort of disturb that, it makes it a bit hazy. All in all, it was pretty good, not much current. So probably max depth was about 11 metres at the end. Good working depth, and so no, it was good diving conditions. We laid out a baseline using 100-metre tape in line with the historic jetty remains, so trying to follow that footprint out, and then with 2 divers working down one side first and just sweeping motion coming back, and then we're covering probably anywhere between 4 and 6 metres from the baseline either side. And then we've started finding towards the end of the 100-metre baseline a larger concentration of broken bottles, but a mixture of 19th and 20th century. We did find a ceramic plate as well, so that we'll get some expert advice on trying to date that. It's interesting because the concentration is probably positioned around the end of the wharf, which kind of makes sense because that's where you're going to have the most interaction between boats coming in, tying up alongside. You've probably got a congregation of people when it comes in, because out here it's super remote, so when a boat comes in, possibly with your mail, you're going to go running for it, so it's going to attract a lot of people, and with that maybe something might slip over the side. We started to find that sort of concentration towards the end of the jetty footprint, which was interesting, and by and large there's probably more buried as well. So we kept finding things on our second dive, and it's highly likely that there's going to be more stuff buried below the seafloor. So it's a real mix of anything from machinery, tools, things like that to help the settlement, and then recreational things, bottles, people drinking on the edge, just biffing them over the side, but also people disembarking or jumping aboard a ship might lose personal goods over the side in between that gap between the wharf and the boat. So there was a whole range. This is the first time it's been surveyed archaeologically, so we're understanding now what is actually in the water along the jetty site or along that footprint, and it means that we can extend that archaeological site that's been recorded on land into the water. We knew the jetty was there, but we didn't know what was on the seafloor, and knowing what is there now as a baseline for what could else be there.
The historic survey of the Te Oneroa wharf may have offered good diving conditions under the water, but still provided challenges above the water as the divers are swarmed by Fiordland's famous sandflies.
They were bad. Kept my mask on.
just like the Maori pa in Nohoaka. The sealing gang camps in the whaling station, coal and gold, provide no more a basis for a sustained human presence here than anything that had gone before. And to think of all those work sites and houses that once were humming with life here, all gone, and now no more than the shadow of history on this landscape.